All right, so this week we're going to talk about CSS, and I've kind of alluded to it at different times, and CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this site right here called CSS Zen Garden, and this has been around for a while, and I'm going to go into the file, and you can see, you know, just like most websites, it's pretty, it's got, you know, good, you know, look to it or whatever, to, you know, whatever. But in here, it's got this tag called this link tag, and we're going to craft this out here in a little bit. But what I want to do is I want to break this tag, and I took out the hyperlink reference that it was referring to. And when I make that change, you can see what the CSS Zen Garden really looks like. Okay, this is the same page, just the CSS not applied. So everything that disappeared between this page and when I refresh it again, and that page really is the CSS. That's your background images, that's your style, that's your layout, that's where everything kind of goes, and the look and feel of the page. And up to this point, what you guys have been doing is just building the structure, right? You guys have the text, you know, you might have some divs in there and different things, but really it's just this plain old, you know, ugliness. The cool thing about CSS is this is a CSS file that we applied to it. It was called 214.css, right? And as I kind of click on this one and this one and this one, and I'll pull up a few of these, you can see that I can take the same page, the same HTML, and apply a new CSS file to it, or another CSS file to it, or another one. And the cool thing about this is you can do some really amazing things with CSS, but your HTML will never change. So right now, your last assignment that you guys built out of HTML, you could take that and probably even have like Dixie State University and a bunch of and move stuff around and have that same HTML, but give it a whole new style based on that style sheet that you have. Does that make sense to everybody out there? So we have this external file we're applying. And from that, we can give it all of these totally different, looks and feels and move stuff around. And for the majority of this class moving forward, we're working inside of CSS to teach you how to take that HTML and actually make it look good into a web page that, is no longer, ugly. Okay? You guys have any questions on that you might have? Okay. Put some brackets here. I'm going to move some things around. I'm going to show you guys how to do a lot of this. So the main reasons we do this are, first we're doing Stranger Things, right? Let's see what's going here. Okay, so we do have that. Is that us? We're doing Stranger Things, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not crazy. I am a little crazy, but all right. So what we want to do here is let's show you guys some of the various types of CSS that you can use. And there's really 3 types of CSS that exist out there. There's 4, but 3 are probably the most common. What we do is we first create a line inside of our head tags. Okay, it's not in our body, this is in our head because this is metadata, is descriptive data, stuff like that. And we use a link tag, and a link tag is going to link a file up to our current page, and we tell where that file is going to be, and so we use a hyperlink reference. Now we're going to specify this file. We're going to call it style.css, but inside of my Web 1400 folder, we don't actually have that file right now. So I'm going to go make a new file, call it style.css. Now you don't have to call it style.css. It could be monkey.css. It could be, whatever you want .css. But it probably needs to end in CSS. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to flip it over to this right side of the screen over here so you can see what I'm doing. when I type out some CSS over here. You also need the type of relationship you're going to have with it. And in this case, we're going to just say rel equals style sheet. Another one you can do, this is not required in HTML5, is you can say that the type of style sheet it is text/CSS. And even though it's not required right now at this point, later on in the class, we're going to add a media type, and we're going to say something like, you know, screen or like only screen or something like that. Again, at this point, you know, you could add it, but it's not required. It's going to work just fine without it. But here in a few weeks, again, you'll see where I'll start using a different tag in there and different things. But just know that you can use the media attribute as well. So these really are the ones that you're going to want, is this link, hyperlink reference, relation, and a type. Although this isn't required to validate, I don't believe. Okay. Now, when you're writing CSS, we just, you know, we kind of go through our page here, and we first select, and that's a key word there, because we're gonna select an object, and we call these selectors that we want to change. And so let's select the tag h1, and we're going to put some curly braces to say h1 is going to be applied some specific styling now to it. And you know, our h1 tag at this point just is kind of big. It also has some space above it and below it that's being applied. But we can change that up. We can do a font size, and let's do like a 4 rem, and we'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. But when I refresh it, you can see how we've made that larger. Okay, if I change that back down to 1 rem, you can see when it saves how 1 rem is just a normal font size, like this font size right here. That's like the default font size is 1 rem. 2 rem would be twice as big. 1.5 would be 50% larger. You know, 4 rem would be 400% larger. And you can kind of change this around. We're going to talk about rem, where that comes from, a little bit later on. At this point, don't worry about it. You can use other things like pixels. We could say this is going to be 20 pixels tall, or 12 point size, or different things. But really, for web, you want to be using rems primarily. So we'll go with 3 rem, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Maybe we want to change the font color. So I'm going to change the color over to be like red. We should probably find the actual red of Stranger Things, but we're not going to mess with that right now. And you can see how we're at 3 rem, and we've made that red. We could go in here and we could say background color is going to be black, and that's a hex code color. We'll talk about that here in a little bit too. For that to finish saving. There it is. And you can kind of see that being applied as well. You can also not only apply different things to it, but you can take away things. So, for example, I said that the font size is made a little bit larger. We could change that back down to 1 rem, but we could also take off the margins that were applied to it. And we can see there's a margin above it and below it, and when I refresh it, that margin is now taken away. So HTML does apply its own style by default sometimes. It's kind of lame style, but it does. And with CSS, you can take that style away, and you can add all kinds of style. Go. So I just changed this to split, so I could flip it to 1, or I could do a horizontal or something like that. So that's just a little tool and brackets that you can use. Yeah, and I like to use that, and that's one of the. I mean, I use another editor up in my office when I'm really into it. But this is, a nice way that students can see both files at once and kind of see what I'm doing on each. And then over here, I'll just refresh it every couple minutes to see exactly, the changes we're applying to it. So let's say I wanted to make my menu bold. Okay. What selector do you guys think I would use to make my items bold in here without having to use the bold tag. And I can give you the CSS for it, but what selector would we use? What do you guys think? No, so we want to talk about the selector, and the selectors are these guys right here. So if I wanted to change our H1, you know, our Stranger Things, and make it a different color and all that stuff, I selected the H1 tag. If I want to change these anchor links in here, what selector do I use? I mean, I could use nav, kind of, but in this case, I want to be more specific on the selector. So to be most specific, I want to use the anchor link because it's really, you know, narrowed down on that item right there, as you guys can see, right? Does that make sense? So my anchor link, I could go through and say my color is going to be, maybe we'll also do that same red. And, you know, you can use, and again, we haven't learned these yet, but a font weight bold or something like that. And that would bold that font, for us. And so when I refresh it now, you can see they're red and they're actually bold now. I could go through and take off the underline with text decoration and say we want to, you can have an underline, an overline, line through, but we're going to change it to none. That way the underline can be taken away. Okay? You guys with me? All right. Now let's talk about CSS a little bit. We've shown you how to use some of it and kind of how this works, and I kind of want to talk about the rules and what they are. So when we look at CSS, again, like I said before, this is what we call the selector. So when you hear me say selector, this is what we're talking about. This right here is what we call the declaration. So there's multiple declarations for this selector. And within a declaration, you have the declaration property, and then you have the declaration value. Okay, so you'll hear me say that from time to time, and that's the you know, true way of or specifying for each of these. So selectors, declarations, the property, the value, the declaration. Now, let's kind of go through some different ones that we haven't covered here. Let's first go in here, and I'm going to apply some CSS to the body. The way this works is they're called cascading style sheets. And so with this cascading effect, typically, unless the HTML overrides it, they will inherit the properties of their parent. So if I go into body and I say font weight is going to be bold, everything should be made bold. And you see, even my paragraphs are made bold, but I applied it to the body. So this is really the, you know, the highest parent right now, I guess, and everything inside of body is getting that style. So that's font weight. Maybe let's go with font family. And font family allows us to go through and specify unique, you know, typefaces, things like that. So we go Maradona. We could do a common Times New Roman, comma, and we could do a sans serif font or something, although this is a serif font. And what we're saying here with that is all of my fonts of the whole page should be Verdana, and if it's not installed, roll over to Times New Roman, and if that's not installed, then go just pick me some sans serif font. Do you guys understand the difference between serif and sans serif fonts? Okay, there's a few no's in there. These little bad boys over here, these little kind of tick marks, these are serifs. So sans serif font does not have the little serifs, hence sans. And so I guess what I'm doing here is saying, you know, Verdana I think is a sans serif. That's a serif font. Then pick me just a sans serif font. But you know, you can kind of go through and everything is being changed, right? So that's font family. We talked about font size, and by default, let's just say everything's going to be 1 rem, unless I want to override that with that kind of cascading effect. I'm going to say the H1 is going to override the body or everything and make it a little bit larger. We can also do a line height. By default, line height is going to look something like this, and that's fine, you know. But often, you know, when you get big, long bodies of text, you know, when I kind of crush it in, sometimes it's a little harder to read through there. And so opening that up maybe a little bit, maybe like, let's say 1.5 lines, might make it a little bit easier to read. Now I've got to fix some stuff up there, but you know, it might look a little bit better. Maybe a more appropriate way to apply that might be to our paragraph tags. We could do a line height 1.5, something like that. You also have the margin tag that exists out there. Paragraphs, for example, have a margin above and below them. That's what creates this space right here. So if I come into my paragraph tag and I say margin 0, and for right now, I'm just going to teach you 0 to get rid of them. We'll talk about margins a little later on. You can see how those margins are now gone. One thing that exists in CSS, you see this little spacing along the edges here, this little white border kind of goes around. That's a body margin. So we could say body, oops, sorry, I've got body in there, margin 0. And I'll refresh that, and you can see how everything goes up against the edges now. And you may want that, you may not want that, depending on what you're trying to do with your page. There's another one, which is text align. Let's see our H1 up here, and we've got that kind of going across the top. And I can do a text align, and we can change that over to center. I'll refresh that once it saves. And you'll find that this text will center itself in the middle. If it goes, still saving. Okay, and you can see that, you know, aligned in the middle or aligning to the right if we do so choose. You can see that going over to the right. Does that make sense, everybody? You guys good with this? There's a lot of these tags that I'm going over, and I'm kind of going over them kind of fast. And you know, try to take notes the best you can. We're screencasting this, so you can go back and rewatch this if you want. But if you kind of get stuck in an area and you just don't remember, I think I talked about this a little bit last time, just look up W3 schools, type out CSS, and then type out some kind of description of what you're looking for. You know, maybe like align text or something like that. And, you know, you'll see some of these that will come up, different things, and they might help you. So, you know, you can come in here and we could do a try it yourself and look at the various versions of text align being applied and whatnot. And so don't be afraid. W3 Schools is a great resource for new students that want a simple example on how to do something, and you can look at the CSS and exactly what they did for that. Okay? Let's go back and we'll just center that Stranger Things logo. Be good. We can also give widths to different things. So the center right now, I'm going to say we're going to give it a width of 500 pixels across. Does everybody understand what a pixel is and how that works? Okay, you can kind of think of it as a dot on the screen, and this would be 500 dots across the screen. We'll bring that up a little bit more later on. But again, you can see that 500 pixels width being applied. Right? There's another one. I don't really use this one as often. You can do a text indent. Let's go with 2 rem on that. And you can see how it's kind of brought that over a little bit. I don't really like it. I mean, I guess you could indent all your paragraphs, but I don't. Let's see here. No, Other ones I want to show you. The book talks about this text shadow. I can't tell you I really like it. I honestly kind of hate it, but that's why I was showing you. I always think it's really hard when you apply these text shadows. They're hard to read. You guys see the little red edge to it there? Basically, you said this is an XY axis, kind of coordinates off of where the text would be, and you're saying go to the right, X, on the x-axis go over 2, or go, to the left -2. But in this case, we're going 2 and then go 2 down, and that creates that, But you can add negatives in each of those if you want to, and kind of move that shadow around. The problem is it always looks weird, and I just don't like it. Another one the book talks about, and honestly I haven't really used much at all, is this white space property. So you can see we've got a no wrap, a normal, and a pre, which is kind of like pre-formatted text. And you can see this no wrap creates this horizontal scroll bar, and it will break outside of whatever container or parent it's within. So do you guys remember in the last assignment we had those divs and we put text in there? This would make those, that text go way outside the div, and you'd have to scroll in, horizontally into the next page to see it. Normal is the default. It'll just line wrap or wrap the text around, and then you can have some pre-formatted text in there. I don't really use it that often, but I know they talk about it in this one. One more we can use is text transform, and maybe specifically on these links I'll do a text transform, and you can capitalize the first letter, make sure everything's lowercase, but I wanted to apply an uppercase to it, which would make our fonts, all go uppercase inside of our navigation, and you can see those being applied there. All right. Let's talk some color right now. So at this point, we are using that color red, and we are using black. And the ways we can determine color, first we can use words, and you can see, built into this editor, we could go through and say crimson, and some of them are really big long colors, but I don't really like this because it's not specific on that one exact color or shade that I really, really want. I want to be very specific. So we can use hex codes, and hex codes, for white would look something like this. The way that these work is typically, well, do you guys know the difference between CMYK and RGB? What does RGB stand for? Red, green, and blue, right? Red, green, and blue. All right, and CMYK? Cyan, magenta, yellow, and what is the K? It actually stands for key, but it is black. Typically, is how it's used, right? I think that's how it is. And which one is used for screens and which one is used for print? You guys know that? These are screens, and this is print. Okay. And when we pull up various color patterns, let's pull up a color.adobe.com, and let's say we are searching for Stranger Things color scheme, and maybe there is a Stranger Things color scheme or something out there. Sweet. We could go look these up. I'm actually going to go back here really quick. But let's say we were looking for a color scheme and we really like this. You can grab the CMYK, and if you are going to print it, it will look the way you intended it to print if you choose a CMYK color scheme. If you choose an RGB color scheme and then you go print it, it looks really funky and your colors won't match always. That's vice versa. If you give it a CMYK color and then you display it on a screen, it won't look the way you intend it to look as well. So for this class, for the most part, we're going to be using RGB, right? But everybody kind of needs to know the difference there. And RGB really, and when we can use RGB, we can come in here and say for this color red, we're going to use RGB, and then we're going to put some parentheses in here, or brackets or whatever, parentheses. And this is a color, let's just go up here, RGB, that goes between 0 and 255. And 255 is the maximum amount. And so if I'm giving it the color red, I would say 255, no green, and no blue. And if I save that and I go back and look at Stranger Things, you know, it keeps it red and looks fine. So when we're talking hex codes, the way that this works is you've got 6 numbers, and I've put FFFF, and that's white. And really what that means is 255, 255, and 255, and you're applying that red, green, and blue. And with screens, when you apply the red, green, and blue and you shine light through it, it shows white. With CMYK, when you apply all the colors together, you know, if you took a bunch of markers and just kept scribbling on top of each other, it would turn black, right? And that's one of the differences between print and screens. A screen has light shining through it. So when we look at hex codes, if I wanted to have the color red, what would I do here? If I want to max out, now this again, think of it like this is red, this is your green, and this is your blue. And I want to max out the amount of red I have. What would I do? Well, that would be in, well, yeah, I didn't really explain this. That was actually really bad. And this, I didn't explain. Sorry, this is my bad, guys. These numbers right here are hexadecimal. Does anybody know how to count binary in here? Okay, what's the first number? What's 0 in binary? 0. What's 1 in binary? 1. What's 2 in binary? 1, 0, right? What's 3 in binary? 1, 1. No, that's 3. Sorry. 1, 2, yeah, 3. We're good. So the way this works is 1 always stands for 1. And then, so if you go 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, right? And I guess I'd have to have a 0 in front of that. If I took this and I said 2 digits of 1, 1, that would be 1 and 2 for 1, 1, and that would equal 3, those two together. Does that make sense to you guys? And if I wanted 4, then I'd have to say 1, 0, 0. That's the third digit over, really, I guess you could say. And so that's 4. And if I wanted 5, I'd have to say 4 plus 1. So I'd say something like that, and that would equal 5. And if I wanted 6, I would change that back to 0 and change that back to 1, and that would be those 2 digits, you know, the 2 first ones. Does that kind of make sense to you a little bit? The reason is we have 10 fingers. And when we count, you know, 8, 9, 10, when we get to that second one, we don't have a third hand to actually show 11 over here and 12 over here. We have to reset our hands, and so, you know, we count from 1 up to 9, and then we go to 2 digits, right? And then we go 11, 12, and then we count up, you know, 21 and 22, and then we get up to 99, and then we go to 3 digits. And that's what we call base 2. Okay, that's what we call base 10. Binary is base 2. Think of it like you only had 2 fingers and you were counting. And you would say 0, 1, and then we'd have 2, and then 3, you know, and we'd start counting. And that's kind of how they work is, well, you don't have 2 hands. You have really 1 hand to kind of point fingers. But that's kind of how that. Now, hexadecimal, the way that that works is you have 0 through F. And that counts 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, oops, B, C, D, E, F. And there's 16 digits here, hence the hexadecimal. Are you with me still? So when you count up to the letter F, being essentially 10, and we wanted to go to a double digit, then all of a sudden we would count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then we would say 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to F, and then we would go to 2, 0, all the way up to F, and that's how we count. Now, if you actually do the math and count those up, and you go all the way up to FF, that's 255 values. And that's why this red, green, and blue is there. That's why with hexadecimal, we say FF, that's essentially 255. FF for green, or 00 for no green, or probably something like 80 for like midway blue or something like that. And that's how you count. So back to what I was saying before, if I want to give it full red, how do I do that? How do I max out the red? What's the highest red color I can give it? FF, right? And that stands for 255. And how much green? 0. And blue. Whenever you look at a hexadecimal code in here, you can see this hex right here, E3, B7, 40. You can kind of translate that in your head on how much red is given and how much green is given, how much blue is given. Okay? If they start with an E, that means it's probably got a lot of red in it. It's high up on that 0 through F scale. 7's about midway green, and 40 for blue is not as much blue, but we can produce that kind of orange from that color. Okay? Now again, that's not going to be on a test anywhere, and I know a lot of you guys are dozing off on the math behind it all, but it's kind of fun if you can understand where those numbers are coming from. I remember the first time somebody tried to teach me base anything, count on base 8, and I'm trying to count to base 8, and they're trying to make me convert it over to base 20, and then, revert it back to base 10 and give me the numbers. Like, it was the worst. So, I get it. Okay? Best practice on the web is pretty much to use hexadecimal. But there are times where we will use RGB. And when we use RGB, are times typically with transparency. So what I'm going to do is, let's give this H1 color red again. And I'm going to give this a background color, but this time I'm going to do an RGB color. And I'm going to just go with a very light amount of gray. Oops. So let's go like 200 by 200 by 200. But this time I'm going to change it. I don't know if you guys caught that. I changed it to an RGB A. And the A stands for alpha channel. And that means I'm going to make it slightly half opaque, I guess you could say. And you can see where that gray is not so strong. It is allowing some of that white, from the body behind it to come through. If I take away that, or if I say, 0, let's look at that really quick. So that saves. You can see 0 made that totally opaque, and if we say that goes back to 1, we can see that gray is just a little bit darker. So now we can start adding opacity to what we're doing. And a lot of websites do that. I mean, you see this opacity kind of bar coming over here, right here. It's kind of hard to see, but it has that opacity being applied to that bar there, and this one overlaying, and you can see the background image through behind that button there too. Again, that's the opacity being applied. Probably a white with a very slight, opacity being applied to it, or a strong opacity being applied to it. All right. There's lots of color generators out there if you guys need them. Just look for them. We're using that color.adobe.com. A lot of these, you can input an image, and it will output and kick out a color for you. But really, what you're going to want to use are just the hex codes for different things. And yeah. Let's see here. All right, let's talk about the different kinds of CSS. Now, I said there were 4 kinds. 3 are common. 1 you should really only use in this class. But I want you guys to understand what the other ones are and when it's appropriate to use them. Okay? So we have right now on our page some CSS being applied. And we are making our anchor links red here, and you guys can see those. Okay? And we're using the type of style sheet that we call external style sheets. And this is really what you should be doing for the rest of this course. But there are other types you can use. The next type below this is what we call embedded CSS. And the way we use that is we just type out style tags within head tags, and we just write CSS here. And I might say something like anchor links are now going to be given the color green. Okay? And as I go out here, you'll notice all my anchor links just turn green. So who takes precedent here? External or embedded? Embedded. So embedded overrides external. You guys with me? All right, the next thing we can do is called inline. And inline, the way that this works is you literally go to the tag and you give it a new attribute called style. And then inside of there, you just give it the color. And in this case, I'm going to give it purple. And you can see how I'm just writing the same CSS in there. I'm not having to use a selector right now like I did here or up here, because I'm within that selector, that unique tag. But as I refresh, you can see how home is now purple. Okay, so inline overrides embedded. Embedded overrides external. The last one we can use is called imported, and we just do an @import URL. And in this case, we go out and we say something like google.com/style.css, whatever their style sheet is. And this will go out to google.com if that file existed, which it probably doesn't, and it will suck that CSS in and place it right there. This is very rare. You don't see imported as often. You see inline very often, and you see embedded very often. Now, why would we want to use external CSS? Why is that something? I mean, why do this over one of these other ones? Pros and cons of external CSS that you guys can see right now. Better organized? Okay, I'll give you that. Hannah?
It looks like you could change things easily without messing stuff up.
Okay. Over here at Lennon? Okay. And I could take all of this, to be honest with you, and I could cut it out and I could place it in here, and it would look really nice too. So, I mean, I don't know if I would say that it looks nicer over there. It works here too. I mean, I could save that right there and save this one, and it's still going to work like a champ. It still looks great. But any other ideas? Take some of these out. Well, I don't need to take it out yet. Really, the main reason here, guys, think of a site like Amazon. Okay? Do you think they have CSS applied here? For sure, all over the place, right? And as you dig down through the deal of the day, you can see that their menu bar is that kind of dark blue, gray. Do you guys think that they go on every single page to that nav element or header element and they say make it dark blue? Or do you think they just update it inside of their external CSS in one location, and then every page Amazon has ever made will get that style? You see what I mean? Okay, you're really creating one file that's going to maintain the look and feel of the entire website. If you're having to use embedded, or heaven forbid, inline, you really just, you can do it on one page. If you're doing this in embedded, you have to go update every single page. If I wanted to change Amazon's menu bar, I would literally have to go to every single page to make that adjustment. If I was using inline, I would have to go to every single tag on every single page to make those changes. Now, the reason you would not use external is if, one, you didn't have the access to it. So often when you're editing websites, if you guys have ever edited like a WordPress site or some kind of Wix or Squarespace or something that has their CSS protected that you cannot touch it, you can write embedded or inline depending on what you want. Number two is if you want something overwritten and you only have access into these and you want to override the default CSS, whatever that might be. But for the most part, from this day forward and on, everybody in here should be writing strictly in internal, or sorry, not internal, in external. I don't ever want to see inline or embedded, and I see no reason to ever use imported. But those are the 4 different types of CSS that are out there that we'll be using. Well, I guess you should know about, but we'll sometimes use. Let's talk really quickly about absolute size and relative size. So for a long time, and I don't know if these computers, I don't think they do anymore, but for a long time, most screens, like your Dell, for example, over there, your screen probably has a DPI or PPI of 72. Now, does anybody know what DPI or PPI stands for? Go for it. Dots per inch, okay? And so what I could do is I could take a ruler on my screen and I could put it there, and if I got really close to my screen and I started looking at it, I could actually count up 72 dots across an inch across my screen, okay? You guys with me? 72 up each screen, and so you can kind of, that's what resolution's based on, right? Well, you started seeing a lot of cell phones come out with retina screens. You guys have probably heard that term before, right? And retina screens come in like 200, 300 plus per inch. I think on my phone it's like 400 or something. And that means that for every inch, I mean, they're going to have like 400 dots in there. And these computers are actually higher now. I can't remember what they're at. They're probably like a couple hundred. And it's just a finer, more crisp resolution. It's kind of like 1080p going up to 4K, right? And it's a much finer, crisp, resolution on there. They're packing way more pixels on that screen than they ever did before. So let's say on my H1 here, I went through and said that this is going to be 30 pixels wide. And we went back and we looked at it and we said 30 pixels. That's the exact size I want it to look. And let's say I was doing this on her Dell or something, and I'm assuming that's older. I don't know if you've got Retina or not. But I was doing it on her screen, and then I pulled it up on my phone, which has a much higher DPI or PPI applied to it. Would this font look the same? Would it look smaller, or would it look larger? Who thinks it's going to look the same? Anybody? Curious? Okay. Who thinks it's going to look smaller? Raise your hands. A couple of you, 3, 4. Who thinks it's going to be larger? Okay, a couple of you guys. You kind of have to think to yourself, if it looks like this, and I've got 72 dots across the screen, that this S might be, 20, 30 pixels across the screen, right? If I go to my phone now, that has 400 dots across the screen, all of a sudden that S is going to be ultra tiny. Okay, do you guys see the problem here? That viewing something on a mobile device or a retina screen is not always going to appear the same. If you are using a pixel amount, sizes are going to look different. Go.
I do have a question.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with this, but I do have a class at 10, but I want to join your class.
Let's talk after, okay? Email me or something. You have?
On your YouTube.
Oh, I'm probably not getting those comments then.
Okay.
curl@dixie.edu. Okay. Sorry about that. So that's what we call an absolute type. Okay. So if we look up this, if anybody is ever curious, look up CSS units of measure. You can pull up this one right here, and we've got different absolute lengths on here. We have centimeters. You can literally say my font's going to be 1 centimeter across. You know, a millimeter, inches, pixels. We just talked about having that problem. Point size, and even picas, if you know what those are too. Points are often used in Word, things like that. Pixels are pretty much the only one you'll ever use, and the only time that's okay to use pixels, in my opinion, are probably page layout, widths, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as we get into more width, things like that. But fonts, stuff like that, we want to stay away from, okay? We have things over here now that are called relative lengths. And relative lengths basically say, what is the optimal, for example, reading size? So if we look in our H1, and I go back with 1 rem, like we talked about previously, the browser, whether it be on my phone or on the screen, deems this size of font right here the optimal reading size. Okay? And if I look at that on my phone, I can almost guarantee that the font, because I read this close rather than this close like a monitor, is probably going to be a little bit different than this screen here. But the browser is now determining that size to use. Okay? Now, where the word rem comes from really comes from the word m. And if I refresh this now, and it looks exactly the same. Rems and M's, for the most part, are going to be the same. And where that comes from is the letter M. It looks at the width of M, literally the letter M, and that's why they called an M, EM, and says the optimal size of M is normal reading size. And if I say 2, my fonts are going to be 2 times the width of M, essentially. Okay, you guys with me here? So if I say 2M, it's going to be twice as big. Now, where we get into trouble is stacking with M's. M's and Rems, let's just talk M's for right now. If I say my body font is going to be 1M, and I say my H1 is going to be 1M, my H1 is going to be 1M in this case. If I say my body font is 2M, and my H1 is 1M, my H1, when it shows up as 2M. You can think of it because 2M is a parent and 1M is a child. It's almost timesing itself, and you get 2M, and we can look at that really briefly here. And everything is out of whack, right? But these are twice the size. If I change this one now to 2M, essentially you're getting 2 times by 2, and certain elements are going to be 4 tall or 4 wide. And you can see that being applied to that H1, and that's using a 4. So a lot of students, when they're using M's, kind of get all goofy because they don't know, why something's appearing larger than they want because of the stacking order. So what's introduced now is this R for rem, or root element, or root M, I guess. And it goes back and says I'm basing it off of HTML, not the parent. Okay, and so when I say that something's going to be 2 rem, it's going to be 2 rem. There's no more times tables. There's no more guessing. Everything, is going to be 2 rem, even the H1, and it's not going double the size. Okay, so for font size, you guys should be just getting used to using rems for everything. You can use M's if you want to. They're fine. You see it out in the wild sometimes too, but my preference is probably rems for everybody. There's other relative units out there. There's the M we talked about. There's the X, which is rare. I don't know if I've ever seen that used. The CH, I never see that either. There's rem we talked about. Viewport width, viewport height. These are very rare. And percentage is actually pretty common. 100% is 1 rem. Okay? 200% is 2 rem. They're all relative again. Viewport width and height is cool because it changes on how wide your screen is. So this one's using 20. Think of it almost like a 20% of the viewport. And as we resize now the width. I don't know why that didn't go. That font will also resize with me. Okay, they're cool. That's your viewport height and width. Let's see here. What else we want to talk about? All right. So one major problem that's going on with my page right now is that down the bottom I have this mail to link, and as I refresh my screen, it has this email Matt in big bold letters that looks just like my menu, and I don't want it to be red. I don't want it to be bold. I don't want this one to be the same as my menu, but my menu is using anchor links, and because I use that selector, every anchor link now, whether it be an anchor link with a mail to or whatever, is going to be given that style, and again, I don't want that. So there's different types of selectors out there, okay? The most common or easiest, I wouldn't even say it's most common, but the most simplest is just, using the element tag. The next, and probably the most commonly used, is what we know as a class. And a class starts out with a dot. Now you guys need to know this because it's used all over the place. For example, if I pull up this Zen Garden page and I do a quick look at the code and I type out class, you can see all these classes up and down this page where they're using. And classes are used to identify a certain tag within a page and apply some style to it, but not using the default selector. So, for example, I'm going to make a class, and the syntax for this class starts out with a dot. Okay, so I'm going to say dot red, and I can call it dot, whatever, really red or whatever, okay? You do some curly braces, something like color, and I'm just going to say the color red, or I could do my hex code FF0000. Okay? Then at this point, I could pick out this paragraph, and I could say class equals really red is what I call it, right? And I'm going to match those up. So to use a class, you're going to use a dot over here, and you're going to use class equals and then not a dot on this one. And that's the main difference between them both. I come back to Stranger Things, I refresh it, and you can see that paragraph has been given red, and I did not have to go through and use the selector paragraph. I just made my own up. Okay? So you can create your own on the fly. Everybody with me? So I can apply that all over the place. I could go into each of these anchor links and apply it there if I wanted to. I could say this unordered list is going to be given this class equals really red. Now, I'm going to throw you through a loop here. Let's take this really red and we're going to apply this down here. Okay. Now what I want you to glean from this is, one, my anchor links are no longer going to have any style applied to them, so my footer should look normal. But I did have this class called really red, and I applied the really red to the UL. Would you guys expect these to be red? They didn't. Now they are bold, okay, and they are uppercase. You can see my CSS, that's applying to it. This is not applying to it. This one is applying to it, and that one is not applying to it. Can anybody tell me why?
You're not specific enough.
That's one reason. I'm not specific enough. But I did say at one point that a parent will, push its styling down to its children. Like we applied something to body, everything got that color. Why is it not being applied here? I did tell you once, I just didn't know if anybody actually understood. But it's an important concept to understand because you're going to run into this problem. You're going to add some style to something and it's not going to apply for some reason, and you're going to have no idea why. So in this case, think of that cascading effect, okay? I told you it goes imported and then is overwritten by external. Then external can be overwritten by embedded. And embedded can be overwritten by inline. And inline, and I did say this briefly earlier, can be overwritten by HTML. HTML, if I did not apply that really red, would it be blue? And would it have visited ones the stupid purple? Okay, because I'm specifying an anchor link right here, what's happening is right here it says make everything red, make it bold, make it all blah, 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 blah. And then anything inside this list item, if I put this in right here too, I'll put a bunch of garbage text in here. You see how that's red, the underline's gone. But that anchor link has its own HTML style applied to it. Okay, and it's saying make it blue, give it an underline, make it bold. So I do actually have to be very specific. I have to say class equals really red in this case. And then if I did that and it's saved, that home is now red, and I'm being specific. Does that make sense to you guys? HTML can override stuff if you're not watching it. Now, a more appropriate way of doing that would be this. This is what we call a descendant selector. We say anything that has the class really red applied to it, space, anchor links. That's saying any anchor link that is inside of a really red class, any anchor link that's inside of a really red class, have that style applied to it. So in this case, I am being very specific. Okay, I'm saying apply these anchor links. Let me get this saved here, and we can go back and look at it quick. And I'll refresh it, and you can see how those now have that style applied to them. I did not go into each one of these and apply that really red. I just said apply it to the anchor links within that. Does everybody understand that? Now, if I wanted to do a descendant selector for this paragraph, I could do something like this. I could say, look inside my body tags, look inside of my main tags, at paragraph tags, and font, weight, bold, or something like that. You guys understand that? Now they are descendants, which means that if I take this main out, it will look for any paragraph inside of my body, whether it be inside of a main or not. If I put main here, paragraph could be, any paragraph inside of the main. It could be, a div tag with a paragraph inside of it. It's just any descendant, okay? And that would apply, and you guys can see that being applied there. The last one we're going to talk about is really important as well, okay? So we've given you classes. Well, we've given you just normal HTML elements, selectors. We've given you class selectors. We've given you descendant selectors, and the last selector is called an ID. And we could call this one like blue or something. Do color blue. And in this case, I'm going to go in and let's apply it to my footer. And I'm going to say, instead of class this time, I'm going to say ID equals blue. And those two are going to match up. So classes start with a period. IDs start with a hashtag. When you're using them, classes need to say class equals something, and IDs need to say ID equals something. Let's show you that really quickly and compare and contrast those two. And you can see how all of my footer text is now blue down at the bottom. Now, some of you might say it acts exactly like a class. I mean, I could go through and say class equals blue and change this over to a dot, and that would work, right? And that looks the same, as you can see. It actually didn't save, but it would show up the same. I want to undo that really quick. Go back. The difference between classes and IDs are that IDs can only be used one time on a page. Okay, so my students page, my home page or index page, and my whatever page, they could all use this ID equals blue, but only one time on the page. Classes can be used multiple times. I used the really red here, I used the really red there. That works. The reasoning is later on, as we get into some JavaScript, I might say something like, if someone clicks on the footer, then email them or do something. And if I have lots of blues all over the page, I want to say if they click on this one area and only that area. So IDs can only be used one time. If you use an ID multiple times, meaning I say this paragraph and I say ID equals blue right here, and I save it, and I try to validate it, you will not validate with multiple IDs of the same name. So I'll refresh it there. There's the blue there. There's the blue there. It's actually making it work. But if I run it through the validator now, you can see where I've got a duplicate ID blue, and I'm using it more than once. So I need to go through there, remove off that ID, save it. We'll go back and check it. I passed this time, and I'm fine. I've got another problem here. Oh, the Google thing needs to be removed. That's not validating. And that actually brings up, I think one of my last points is from this point forward, not only do you need to pass the HTML validator, and you can click on that validator service, but you now must pass the CSS validator on every page. Okay? And if you guys want, there's that plugin I showed you in the previous class, Validator Plus, and you can just click on it and it'll pull up if you've got it online and look at it locally, and then, or sorry, look at the CSS and look at the HTML. But that is if they are only online, and that's honestly everybody in here needs to be aware. That's the first thing I do when I pull up your homework. I normally go to the newest page, you know, and a page that I often see problems with. So in your last assignment, I would go to students.html. I'd pull that up, I'd run it through the validator, and it would just show me all your errors, and I'd be like, boom, there goes a big chunk of your points. And then I'd start looking down through to see what you missed and what you didn't miss and things like that. It's really easy just to see if you guys have clean code or not through a validator. So validate your CSS and validate your HTML moving forward. Actually, it's not my last thing. Did we talk span elements? I think we did, right? Okay, couple more things. We're going to teach you guys how to use wrappers or containers. You often see these as. I'm going to use a class called wrapper. I think your homework has you guys use an ID because in the homework you're going to use it once. I'm going to use my wrapper multiple times, so I'm going to use it, put it into a class. Okay? And in this class, I'm going to give my page a specific width. And I'm going to say that this width is going to be, let's just start out with 600 pixels. So let's give it a background color so we can see it. I'm going to give it an RGBA, make it black with a, well, let's say like a little slight opacity applied to it. And what I'm going to do really quickly here is I'm going to go to the top of my page and I'm going to create a div, or a div. I'm going to tab everything over, and I'm going to end the div at the bottom of my page. So this wrapper is encompassing everything, and I'm going to say class equals wrapper. And again, on your homework, you're going to want to be using an ID because I believe it's an ID. But in my case, because I made it a class, I'm going to call it a class. And you can see that wrapper being applied to it now with that gray box around it, right? You can see that width being applied to it. Things like that. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say we're going to give it a margin dash left. And we're also going to give it a margin dash right. And you have a margin top and a margin bottom. We're not going to worry about that right now. And on this margin left, I'm going to say I'm going to move it over 200 pixels. And on the right, I'm going to say just automatically give it the leftovers. All right, let's look at that really quick. And you can see that I've got that 200 pixels here, and over here is automatically being determined. As I move my browser size around, this stays the same. That one is automatically being determined, right? Well, crazy thing is if I go through and I change both to auto, like this, it tries to just determine. It takes both sides and just divides them by 2 essentially. And it's a really easy way to keep your content centered. Now, let's be honest. Are most pages centered like this? This is the, I would say the yes. They totally are.
I'm sorry. I was thinking something else.
Okay? Like if, you jump out online, most websites have some kind of content that's centered there. Do you guys see? You can't see the lines as easily, but is there a wrapper being applied here? There totally is. Okay? As I go out, you see how those edges are resizing there? Do you guys see this layout all the time? Okay? This is that wrapper being applied there. And for your homework, rather than using a static amount like 600 pixels, I think the homework has you use like a variable width like 80 right here. But still, 80% of the screen is always being used. You guys with me here? Okay, and that's what we call a wrapper. And we're going to integrate that as we kind of move along, and it's kind of a cool thing you can do. Now, one more thing I'm going to do here is rather than saying margin dash left, I'm just going to say margin 0 auto. And what that means is 0 margin above and below, automatic margins right and left. Okay? So rather than saying margin dash left, margin dash right, that's what that is, both of them there. So if you guys ever see that and a width applied to it, that's kind of what's going on there. Yeah?
In our homework, do you want us to still follow the directions of that?
Yeah, you want to be exact to the homework. And that's one thing I see a lot of students get in trouble with is they'll leave out a certain part, and future assignments will actually use that somewhere else. So make sure on your homework you're explicit. When you guys get into your own projects, you guys all have your clients that you guys are going to be working on this class. You're probably, on my assignments on the homepage, I actually want to see 960 for your first design, and I don't want to see a variable width like 80%. We'll talk about variable widths and static widths and the differences between those a little bit more. But at this point, we have a page that, is centered and looking good. Now, it does get horizontal scroll bars, and it doesn't adjust right now, but we'll talk about that, about liquid layout and static layout and responsiveness and adaptiveness and all these different things as we get into mobile. But for right now, this is kind of where we're at on our page. Any general questions you guys have? One last thing here. Let's show you guys the CSS wildcard. What that does, now you can see here I pulled up a bunch of different selectors. I've shown you guys 4 selectors today. I showed you guys classes, IDs, elements, and descendant selectors right there. As you can see, there's a lot of different types of selectors and pseudo selectors that exist out there. And as as we move through class, we'll cover a few more as you go into maybe like the Web Design 2 class or Web Design 3 class, things like that. Some really advanced selectors we can start using, but we're not going to get into those at this point. But one I want to show you is just a star. And star means everything. Everything is going to be given. If it's divs, if it's a descendant, if it's whatever. Just a wild card, everything gets it. So the little, shift 8. Last thing I want to show you, I would not use this unless it's absolutely necessary. This can get your CSS really dirty fast. Let's go back and look at this. The exclamation important. The way that this works is it doesn't care the order things are in. So for example, I'm going to have a paragraph with the color red, this important. And then I'm going to have an ID and say color green. If I did not have this important, this was gone, the paragraph using the ID thing would be green. But because I put this exclamation important, it takes precedent. No matter the order of the CSS, no matter the order of specificity, I can't say that word, can I? It overrides everything. It takes the cake. And that's kind of what that one does. Everybody good with that? All right, we'll stop here.